Alright, guys, so we're going to go ahead and call to order. Looks like 4 of us are here, so we have a quorum. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Addressing the email sent by Trustee Pearson in her absence. Is
Oh.
that excused?
So as a board, do we need to do that?
I think you should just make that statement since we've had so many emails and requests, and I also developed that log because of that we should at least address that.
Okay.
She's absent, but also I believe it would be an excused absent due to the nature.
Yeah. Perfect. Yep. So Trustee Pearson will not be attending this evening. She has a personal reason that's completely approved, and so she will not be at this meeting this evening. Addressed. So addressed. Perfect. Okay, perfect. Now, Mr. Dewey, we're ready for the most exciting moments of our lives to follow.
I'm so excited. So everybody's excited until I tell them there's no money. All right. What I want to do today is I actually want to go through kind of how funding works real quick. I'm not going to try to spend a ton of time in it, but I need you guys to actually understand what I. This is where I get it from. State apportionment, this is what it means. All of that type of stuff, right? There's a bunch of other funds and all that kind of stuff. I wasn't really planning on getting into a lot of that today. I was going to maybe get into a little bit of ESSER funding and where we were with that and some of the ideas of what we're going through for next year. But other than that, I'm really kind of sticking with the general fund because that's usually where we're at.
Can I throw out an idea?
Yes.
Whenever you use an abbreviation, can we just expand on what, not necessarily ESSER, but tonight as you move through, so every time you use an abbreviation, can we just expand on what that abbreviation means?
That will be difficult, but I will.
I'll remind you if I have to, and maybe
Yes.
everybody will, and we won't need to as we go, but maybe that will help.
Yes. All right. So are we ready to go?
Yes.
All right. So our system right now in how the state funds us primarily is a unit-based system. And well, I'll go over how the units go and how that's worked right now. There's a separation of what we need to worry about with this is you will hear regularly average daily attendance, ADA, or average daily enrollment, which sometimes people still say ADA, but it's average daily enrollment. Okay. And the state calculates
Average
entirely.
daily attendance.
Yeah. And the state calculates them a little differently and how we have to deal with them. But right now, just so everybody knows, the way we are doing right now is enrollment-based funding, and that's how our numbers look right now. Okay, and I'll show you the difference here shortly between that and average daily attendance.
I've always wondered, I'm sorry, Randy, when does that switch?
For many years, we were always average daily attendance. It's never been anything different.
Right.
When COVID hit, the very first year of COVID, we had so many kids that were out, and we had so many kids that moved to an online presence and that they switched it over to an average daily enrollment model. They had actually had it in the background ready to go. We were testing it forever, saying this is a great opportunity. The State Board of Education did a temporary rule during COVID to start that, and we have been on that temporary rule until the end of this fiscal year.
So it's at the fiscal year where we're gonna, which is
July 1st.
July, yeah, I was gonna say June 30th, but so July 1st will be at ADA.
Yes, average daily attendance, and we will, and I'll explain to you some of the pitfalls and problems with average daily attendance and why this is a big deal to us going forward. Okay, short answer: different world than what we ever lived in prior to pandemic. Just everything's different, as you guys know. Okay. So the biggest part about this, and as you can see, sales says average daily attendance. Just know in the reports I'm showing you right now, it's average daily enrollment. Okay. What the state did is they basically changed the definition of average daily enrollment to attendance. That's kind of how it works. So what we do is we have a list of our kids. Those kids we send to the state on regular interviews. I don't remember exactly one's in October, one's in November, certain things. And then they basically combine all of our enrollments that are in that world. We get 2 sets of reporting periods. The first reporting period is our midterm reporting period. That is the start of school, so whenever that is, if the middle of August, end of August, wherever, to the first Friday in November. That's called our midterm reporting period, okay? And that period of time is literally 80 to 85% of our funding. This is what goes into our state apportionment. These units take control a lot of our special funding, and you'll see that here in a little bit, but just know the different reports associated with that. The next one is our best 28 weeks. So they take every week for the entire year. They look at the best 28 weeks, and then they take those, or the best, and that is what comes out for our discretionary allocation down the way. The bad thing is I don't even know what that is until July.
Do those weeks have to be consecutive?
They do
take
not.
your
It's just
okay,
their best
28 weeks.
Majority of the time, it's our first, and then we start to lose quite a bit in usually March, April, May. The one difference that we saw with enrollment, we didn't really ever lose enrollment as much as what we thought in the past. We always lost ADA because kids would just stop coming. But enrollment, they were still enrolled. They would still show up once in a while. So we'd actually work pretty good. If a student has actually gone in enrollment-based funding for more than 10 days, the state actually wipes out anything else associated with that kid. So we can't get paid for anybody if they've missed 10 consecutive days in a row. So we don't get any funding from that. So that's one of the things that kind of curbs that for us.
And what's the
But
it's
this
fine.
is exactly, so work session,
It
we're
was
gonna go.
very overreaching. It was just that. And what's the logic? Give me the logic behind why instead of enrollment, if the child is still enrolled, that we need to look at the daily attendance. So what is it that the state thinks that the carrot is?
So,
Like,
so
do you
there
see
are
what
s-
I'm saying
Yeah,
here?
so there are some in the
Did that make
environment.
sense, or-
Yeah, there are some in the legislative environment that believe enrollment-based funding has additional incentive for us to play with the numbers to get more student funding.
And when you say enrollment, do you mean daily attendance or
No,
actual enrollment? Okay.
Yeah, at
Okay.
ADA, average
Okay.
daily attendance is, kid shows up, we get that grade, that amount.
Yep.
The crazier thing is, it's actually easier to manipulate an average daily attendance model than it is an enrollment model.
Oh.
And here's the reason why. In an enrollment model, every student has a state EDUID number. And if my number, I give you that number for my daughter, Taylor Dewey, here. If I go and take Taylor Dewey out of the Idaho Arts as well, there'll be two districts with that same number. They look at that and say, well, how much did you have? How much do you have? We split the difference. You get 60%, you get 40%.
And remember, and Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, if a student attendance, not enrollment, attends 4 hours that day, you get a full FTE. A full day, if it's 4 hours.
So let's hold off on attendance. real
Well,
quick.
but I think they need to understand that, because I think the legislature, it's not about manipulating it. They think that student achievement,
Well, butts in the seats mean you're learning something in
Yeah,
Yeah, but
classroom.
I'm getting that, but what I guess what I'm trying to say is totally get it, yes, so the incentive is they want us to get them here, like,
so
we
that
want
they
you to
have-
actually have
our-
them here,
the
that's
student
not why
achievement
enrollment,
increases. That's by attendance versus enrollment, because as long as they're enrolled,
got it.
you get paid either way.
So that's the higher thinking, but keep going, cause I
Yeah,
wanna hear
so
this.
the difficulty is this, is
Too.
I can't staff it when a kid comes here every day. So I have to have 25 class, we basically staff to enrollment,
Mhm.
because you need to know the maximum what you can have. So if every kid shows up, you have to have that, right? But I honestly think it's harder for a teacher if they don't show up than it is because you're working with a kid trying to get them caught up as opposed to a kid. So our goal is never to have the kid just not show up.
Sure.
I think that's the fallacy in this whole thing, is that we just don't care about these kids showing up. No,
Yeah.
it's actually better for us to have them here.
Yeah, I don't think that that's our goal. What I guess I'm asking is that the higher picture of, I don't think that that's our goal at all.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is that they feel like if they enroll, like if they give us the daily attendance that we're gonna like put a Ferris wheel in front of the school. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like make it more fun than we were based on the enrollment funding. Is
You
that why
are-
they're switching it back?
Yeah, so.
Like not to make it that clear, but what I'm
I-
trying to say is that the logic in going back since COVID was now we want more kids to show up daily, right? Because that would be the only logic that I'm getting. Like, it's just,
I am going to tell you in my political answer.
yes.
So there are some in the state that have been trying to change the funding formula for a while.
Mhm.
Those funding formulas are based on enrollment and based on an amount per kid, not a state apportionment, which we do now, it's an amount per kid. Some of those that believe in that method are really mad that we don't have it yet. So one of the ways they have said, until we get this, we're gonna go back to an average daily in attendance. Governor's very believes, and I don't talk to the governor directly, I don't have a communication channel with him. From what I've heard, the government truly believes butts and seats makes a better deal for people. And there are some, I mean, yes, just like you guys said, I think it's a good thing. Now, the key for us is that I can't hire a teacher part-time just because a student doesn't show. And the one thing we've noticed with attendance is that, and I'll show you the reports and the difference between attendance and enrollment base, but attendance, our kids aren't showing up. I mean, my kids are a prime example. So my kid says, I'm a little sniffly. My wife says, well, fine. My kids can handle it. I mean, my student, I believe, is the #1 student at Columbia, and missed a few number of days, but it wasn't like, you know, if I feel a little sick, I'm not going to go. Well, and before, it seemed like your parents made you go.
Right.
And if you had a little sniffle, you went. And now it just seems like we just don't have that you know, belief you have to go to school anymore. And so our numbers are significantly less. And when you're talking when we used to be, the average on an elementary school is anywhere from 97 to 98% attendance. Middle school is in the 95s, is that right, Greg?
About 94.
94, 95. And high school is usually 92, 93. We're in the 80s.
That was before COVID, right?
That was before COVID. We're in the 80s now. And maybe an elementary could get up to 92, 93. Some of our high schools aren't getting any more than
Our high schools are
99.
about 88, 89. Middle schools are about 90, 91, and elementary is about 92.
You
93.
So then
lose
there's
the
the bigger
percentage
question.
to that.
Are you trying to tell me that our attendance doesn't match our enrollment?
Imagine that.
That's what I'm
Yes.
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to
I'm
get
not being
to.
a smarty, but yeah,
Yes.
you're exactly right.
Yes.
Attendance can never match.
Right.
Enrollment's kids here.
Bigger
here's the
picture
name.
is, but there's
Attendance
really
is
no
always
incentive
lower.
because we've actually de-incentivized, because I would agree with you, post-COVID, even within my companies, I've said, listen, here's the easy rule. If you're sick, stay home.
Yeah.
So easy. So we don't have, right? But I think that a lot of families in our district have also adopted, listen, if you're sick today and we'll make it work, you're gonna stay home. So that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hopefully that, I didn't derail you that badly.
It didn't, but this is actually a communication that it's a good start, because we actually are gonna have this, it's a big part of this year's budget. And honestly, and there's a reason for it, and there's a reason why we have to do a lot of things.
Is it, and I would imagine this is the trend in most districts, if not all districts in the state. They're just, everyone's kind of fighting the same. Fighting is not the
It is
right word.
huge. So the
But
state,
80%, 88% in high schools.
Yes, I think overall the state is seeing that it does affect some districts more than others.
Yeah.
It affects us more than West Ada. But yes, I think across the state you could generally say that most school districts have seen a decline in ADA.
Okay.
and when talking to my peers and talking all around, so to give you an example, the state said they've given us an additional $300 million in funding. That was all over the press. Look how much we've done. But literally by going back down to ADA, they have pulled about $125 million out of the system, which that literally goes nowhere. It just goes back to the state coffers. So it's a frustrating thing that they've done to all of us.
Yeah, it's a $119 million decrease for K-12 funding across the schools based on ADA. So you could say, yes, across the state, we are seeing less average daily attendance.
And so we got more money, and you'll see it here in a little bit, in certain categories, but yet we have less money overall, which means a less, so it's really a big deal to us. I mean, and you'll see later on how much we have, but let me go through this real quick and just see how the units are combined, and then we can go from here. The one thing, this right here, this report is the enrollment-based system here. You'll look and see all these little tracks. You got elementary, down here we got secondary. The biggest thing over here is this unit divisor. So kindergarten, we're still getting paid half. We have K3 literature that pays for our other part. But so the legislature through this formula only gives us per 40 kids, they only give us 1 unit. And then you start going down to the 1 through 3. Per 20 kids, you get a unit. Per 23 kids, 4 through 6. And then through high school, 18.5. The reason they show this is that they believe, okay, you're going to have a little bit bigger class size in elementary at the 4th, 5th, and 6th level. But in the secondary level, anything above that, they realize you're going to have some smaller class sizes, because some classes, when you're dealing with how we do things, some classes are smaller than others. So that's kind of how it works. So those are the divisors. that we have. There's a little bit here to take out of these special education, and they give it back in different ways to give us some more units for special education that they do as well. And then we have some additional things here. So our summer school programs, we get some middle school summer school programs and our high school summer school programs. The bummer we used to have in high school, we used to have to get about 3 times as much as this. The reason why is we used to have a double session, a big session, that we'd have a student that would go the first session, get a bunch of credits done, and then they would go to the second session in July and get credits done, and we were able to count that kid for both sessions. Now they basically said, nope, you get one session only, so they cut our summer school program basically. So as a result, we moved everything down to a 1-month summer school. We no longer have a 2-month. So it cuts costs, but we actually made quite a bit more money in summer school than we did this for cost, so it's a real big bummer we lost. Each unit is anywhere between $140,000 to $150,000, depending on how you look at it. So it's quite a bit if you lose, you split a unit or two. So when you look at this report, I'm not even going to talk about protection because that goes down a whole nother level. But the number we get to use right now is the 66702. Okay, that 66702 goes into, and I'm going to bring up the salary-based apportionment, and I'm going to make this bigger. This document here is our salary-based apportionment. If I can get it over. I guess I have to pull it the right way. You'll see that now this number's off a little bit because the reports are just off. So the 667.23 is where we are. So what it does is it takes that information and it pulls it down into the different allocations they give us for our staffing. So administrative, for every unit we get 0.075 admin, okay? And so for instructional and pupil services, they split this a while back for in Career Ladder world, and they had a reason for it at the time, and now it's really, it's ridiculously stupid why they do it still, but it is what it is. And so these combined are 1.1, so you get allocated 1.1 teacher or pupil services. And instructional is obviously a teacher in a classroom. Pupil services, somebody like a counselor, social worker, those type of things that aren't assigned a classroom. Nurses, those type of things. So when you get those combined, it tells us how many we have that we get allocated. This is how many we actually had on the general fund. And then we get an allocation of average salary. So average salary, let me open up an example of one here in instructional. It is a fun little adventure based on the career ladder. All right, so remember, we don't pay on the career ladder. We pay on a grid that's similar to our old school style. We have a 0 to 13, and we have 6 columns on that. Well, the career ladder is literally an 8 normal and 4 additional starting next year, basically rungs, as I'd like to call it. And so when we look at these, this is, you see all these little R's and P5s and that. The way it works with the career ladder, you got residential 1, 2, and 3. And let me actually show you one that's a little easier. I apologize. I got one, I didn't even think about it when I was doing this. Where's my average?
So for every 23 units, if I'm reading that correctly, in like that one where we thought the classes would be bigger, are you saying we get 1.1 in pupil services and teachers? Like,
yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, well, for every unit, we get 1.1.
Which is every
23 in that realm.
In that one, in the first and second, yes.
Just making sure I
And
totally
average
understand.
daily attendance. So the enrollment right now, if we have a kid that's there
And then 0.75
regularly,
admin.
then they divide that by 23. So obviously that number of kids divided by 23.
Yep.
As long as the kid hasn't been gone more than 10 days in a row without a medical exemption, then we get that kid. In ADA, that kid has to be there every single day to get that full unit.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I'm just trying to determine how much do we lose of that unit if
I will show
23.
you.
Okay.
Oh, I will show you. It's a fun adventure.
Okay.
So yes, so this right here, I don't know if you guys can see very well, but I will try to make it bigger. This is next year's career ladder, okay? So the way it works
I
here,
can't hardly see that. I'm so sorry.
I try to make it bigger.
I mean, for you, okay.
That better?
Yeah, that really actually is helpful. Sorry, Randy.
It's okay, I'm the same way. So what there is that in residency, there's 1, 2, and 3. These are established by statutory law, and if the state were to change them, then we would get those, then we change, and then they'd have to go through. There's a little bit of increase every single year. This professional,
And is residency, is that how we get to a category 3 contract?
I am not an expert in CAT, so the categories is
Are they even
Residency would be category 1,
CAT 1,
Okay.
2,
not 3 yet, because they don't
yeah,
have their
3. I
license.
think you have to be a 3 to apply for a professional.
Okay,
Yeah. So if you go through the 1, 2, and 3, if you make you run through those 3 and you do well and everything's good and your evaluations, then you get your teaching certificate. Basically, you get your
I see.
you get your certification.
I get it.
At that point in time, you're eligible for the professional rung. Okay. So in that case, anybody that doesn't there, usually we as a district say, you're not good enough, you're gone. So most people go up to that rung.
That's not how it really works.
Okay,
That's not-
That's not how it works at all.
So everyone that's hired, no matter what rung they're on, they already have their teaching
They get there, but they don't have their certification.
credential and certification.
Unless
So it's
they're on
their
an
professional-
alternative route.
Yeah.
So
No.
what is it? What's the
So
cert-
this is, yeah, they are just saying after this amount of time, so you have to teach for so many years before you can actually be called a professional. And then you have to have on the evaluation, you have to meet certain criteria for those many years.
There's some sort. Hold on, real quick. What is this?
And then the categories, we won't go into detail on those because the categories depend on, like if you're on an alternative route,
Yeah.
they can be on a category 1 the entire time they're on a route, and you don't have to move them or even start their tracking until after they get certified.
so let me ask the
Yeah.
bigger question. But
Professional
that's all
endorsement.
federally law.
Yes.
But that's all
No,
sorry,
that's
state.
state.
I didn't mean federal, I meant state.
Nothing in this
I
is
meant
federal.
state. I
Yeah.
meant state. I meant to say state.
Yeah.
I was thinking of us as the state and then the state as the federal.
Yeah. So to get your professional endorsement, I apologize, I said certification.
Yes.
but it's your
Okay,
professional endorsement. Then at that point in time, there's 5 rules of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So in theory, a teacher can be at full professional endorsement within 8 years and get maxed out on this salary schedule, right? In order to gain, there's different requirements to get through a professional endorsement. A few years ago, they made this new level, which is called an advanced professional. This takes more work to get done. There's a lot more requirements. There's 3 out of the last 5. You have to be perfect, or I don't even know the exact things with your evaluation, and you have to have so much of an increase, and it's like, it literally, it's not my land, it's
I get
HR
it.
land.
I
I just
totally
look
get
at it and say, I wish everybody could get to that land, but we just don't have it, right? So this right here, next year, that the top realm on that is gonna be, because there's 4 rungs. Last year, there was only 3, they added the 4th this year. So every year, there's a little bit more in that category of AP. So when we look and see, this is how I calculated it this year. When we look and see how many we have in those rings, we actually only have,
Because you have to meet those requirements for 3 years
yeah.
in a
So-
row to even enter that advanced.
Yeah,
route.
so we barely have anybody in the AP3s. This is this year, AP3s, AP2s. You see how many we have in AP1s. So out of all the teachers that we actually have in the general funded, very few are AP1, 2s, and 3s, and then which potential will get AP4s. So we don't have a lot of people in, and there's some talk about different things that we're doing in there to help with that, but we don't have a lot of people in this advanced professional rung for revenue. Remember, everything you see here is revenue. It has nothing to do with how much we pay.
Right, it has to do with how much we get.
Yes. Associated with those, if you look over here, I'm going to bring this back up because this one's a little easier. Associated with those, you also get an additional allocation if an employee or teacher has anything but BA plus 24 credits or a master's. So we get 2,000 or 3,500.
Randy, can we stop and make sure the board asks questions? I think the point Randy was trying to get to is a unicount generates money based on where they are in the career ladder.
Yep.
Do you guys have any other questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. And the career ladder allocation that we get is dependent upon their certification, kind of where they're at, and each of those dollar amounts matters. So we don't have many in the ones that would generate more dollars for us, is
Right.
what Randy's trying to say.
And
Correct.
then remember that I believe your guys' salary schedule that you approved last year is paying above the current salary schedule, so that you also have a gap you have to be aware of when you are budgeting.
Yeah, I got
Those
that.
budgeting gaps.
Yeah, I got that this was how we're funded. Did everybody else get that that's how we were funded? We all got it.
Perfect.
Okay.
Just don't ask us to explain it to anyone else.
Yeah, I know. So when it's all said and done, when it's all said,
I feel like I was getting there too. I was
Watch a
listening.
video.
Yeah, I know. I see like we'll text you the meeting.
yeah. So when it's all said and done, we come up with two different numbers. One's an average teacher salary, and one's an average, basically an average pupil personnel salary. And so when we go here to our state apportionment, here's the two numbers that the schedules actually come up with. The
Can you make that bigger
49,592.
again? Thank you.
Is it? I didn't.
No, me.
Oh,
No,
okay.
yeah,
Good.
sorry, not
I was
you.
like, I didn't change it. So we get an allocation from each of these. That's how much we get for our teachers and our pupil personnel services this year. And then it goes down here to this other guy. We get 37.5% of our units we get for classified. Okay, and then when it's all said and done, at that point in time, you look at that, and then we get a whole $24,000 this year for classified workers. For each of those 250 we get $24,000. Yeah, and so when we do that, the totals come down here to this other side. Then they look and see, okay, how much is that compared to what you actually pay? Right? In our world here, as Christy was saying, we paid more in administrative. We paid quite a bit more in instructional and pupil personnel. And if you look, it's almost $3 million or $3.5 million, right? And then we pay about $2 million more in our classified. So where this money comes from is discretionary funds, and I'll show you where that's at. But if we were to pay less in any of these items, the state would only give us that much. So we have no incentive to pay less at any given time, right? So there is a use it or lose provision that we have. I'm not going to even go into that because we're not even close to that, and it's not that big a deal to us. So, and then they also give us, they try to tell us it's a benefits apportionment. Well, really what it is Per C and FICA. It's not health insurance benefits, it's Per C and FICA. So they give us on top of that, whatever they give us, the lower of those two. So not only are we not getting the full $53 million from the state, we're also not, for anything different, we're not getting the additional Per C FICA. So it costs us an additional 20% on top of the overage to pay over what it is. But that's what we have to do to maintain, and I mean, it's every district does it. Very few districts are on the career ladder just because, especially in this area, because it's so easy to pop into different districts around here. Now, if you're in, let's say, a Blackfoot or a Snake River or Wendell or any of those, it's a little easier because you don't really have the competition to, for somebody coming and pulling those people. But it is, that's what we get. And so when it's all said and done, we get those funds. And I'm gonna pull open. Oops, I got the wrong folder up. Sorry. And I'm gonna give you an answer where we are compared to what we thought. All right, I'm gonna go here. So all I'm looking at here is this is the same. This top portion is that same salary apportionment that I had on that last schedule I was just showing you, but just in a different format so I can read it a little easier. Okay, so now I'm too big. All right, so when we look here, this is our budget. So we budgeted 672 units. Okay, we actually came in at 667.23. We weren't 100% sure at the beginning of this year because one of the unknowns that we weren't sure of was that the new Elevate charter that was up at over there right on our border that they started, and those were picking our kids that were literally our best advisor in our unit count. So we weren't 100% sure what was going to happen there. So we kind of just guessed at the 672, roughly with 667. That's a normal allocation. That's a little different for us. That's not too much to make up. Okay, obviously I'd love to make up more, not have to make it up, but it is what it is. The harder part on this is that what we budgeted for average teacher was actually significantly less than what we actually had. And there's two different reasons for it. The first one is, I might have messed up, but I'm sure that's not the case because I never do that. So I'll ask my wife. And then the other one is we hired teachers with different years of experience in that. So, or if our average teacher goes down, hopefully on the back end, our costs went down as well. And that's exactly what happened with this. So when you look over here, and it shows that we are, oh, I didn't include the right column here. We are about $1 million less. If you look at the difference here, $1.4 million less in revenue, minus another, so $1.6 million. We are about $1.6 million off in our revenue projection from what we actually thought we were going to get. Okay. Now we have savings in our budget for expenditures of at least $1.6 million. So that's why every time I get with you guys, I'm like, oh my God, this isn't that big of a deal. Now, one of Greg's first years, we did have a big deal because we were 10 units down and I didn't have the budget savings. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we figure this out and doing that. But if I have both sides come down, it's just, then it really is, we just budgeted too high in both columns. There's no way of me knowing. We had 150 people leave. I don't know who's going to come. We're just guessing, right?
And again, that's probably an issue that you would see in bigger districts with more districts around, like in this area with the competition.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And pay drives a lot. I mean, we have the unfortunate thing that Boise pays a lot more than us because they have an additional allocation because of their independent status. And so they get to have a greater, higher end than we do.
Sure.
And some of our more experienced people will go there to make that higher end.
Yeah, and just for the board to understand, it's, you know, anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000 to 9,000 more, you know, across the board. So it's very hard to compete. And then that forces West Ada to stay close because Boise and West Ada, and then it kind of trickles down into Canyon County. So it's a significant challenge for us when you have a district that close that can pay that much higher.
And we have a different type of student as well. I mean, so when you look at a lot of West Ada, I think their free and reduced lunch percentage is like, I think they get less than, they're 3 times our size, but they get less Title I dollars than we do.
Yeah, it's,
I mean, you just
20s,
look, I mean, so it's a different, you got pockets of free and reduced lunch where we got entire schools. And Boise has some entire schools, but majority of their pockets they got a much different class of individual, which then kids tend to come in with a little bit better knowledge coming in, which we have a little bit. So a teacher might not want to deal with a student with learning disabilities as much as we have, or learning struggles. So then that's some of the problems we have as well. So we do what we can to stay, and obviously we think ours is better than anybody, but you know, sometimes you just can't keep them. So we hire a lot of new, and we train them up, and then sometimes they leave. But we do what we can to keep them there. To put it in perspective, I'm gonna just kind of give you, so here is this is our new one. Let me go through and open up the one that's the actual document that's here. All right, so you see that 1.7 I was telling you before. I'm gonna leave it small for a second, but look what happens when our average salary, I'm just gonna go up. So that number right now is, this instructional, that number right now is 33.7, okay? If I was to add just $200 in average salary, it's $200,000 difference in how much we get in revenues. So just that little bit of change in this average salary makes a huge difference in how much we get. So when you're talking, you know, we actually estimated 59.95. So if this was 50,995, we would have had almost $1 million more, and our difference here would have only been because we have less units. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it was a significant amount of difference with average salary, but again, I would be freaking out if we didn't have the savings as well on the backside.
So those are the two biggest difficulties for the board, is to determine the amount of units that we'll generate, how many students will we have, and then average salary, which we don't know who we're gonna hire over the summer as we change. And so that's why it kind of plays into, that's what makes budgeting schools is difficult, because you're not able to predict that. You don't have that perfect crystal ball, what that will be, but, which is why it's important to have a fund balance.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm just the moving targets. I mean, they're just so hard to hit. Like you just said, those two.
They are.
They're all constantly moving.
Constantly
How do
moving,
you
constantly
budget?
changing.
Well, I was just gonna ask you that. Do you have a quarterly, do you get a, like, can you even ever have like a balanced quarterly, like, we're good?
Well, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but do you,
So
I
we'll see
know
again.
you do, but
Remember
like,
there's the
what I'm
two
saying
times-
is that since every fiscal year, it feels like you're trying to hit a whole new,
So yes, we do, and this comes again as how we're generating revenue. So we have to kind of budget based on what the revenue we're gonna generate, but once we have that, then we do go quarterly, make sure our books match. Now, as Randy mentioned, occasionally if we come in and we're off, we need to have enough money that we can either start making some changes in our budget, so where expenditures are to meet that, or we have some savings that we'll be able to do that.
how much do we have in savings?
Right now, $4 million would say, I don't know around the top of my head, or something.
Somewhere in there, so plenty to cover this deficit. And when did you know we had this
This year.
deficit? Like,
Yeah.
at the very
No.
beginning of the year, when did you guys,
So look,
so when does that
so
come to
I
fruition? When
so
is that?
Remember, so our first midterm is the first
November?
Friday in November. We turn all that information in at the end of November, and we start getting numbers right around December on our first numbers count. I take that information, I quickly put it in here. I quickly try to get the information because we turn in our payroll information at the end of October. The problem with that is sometimes we have so many new teachers and people from other states, we don't even have that information. So we're doing estimates in there. Generally, most of that gets trued up in January for us, okay? But before then, I know, and even before that, we know, we're looking at enrollment or attendance. Those
Yeah,
first
these are your
weeks.
numbers, these are your predictors.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm
like,
just trying to get a good idea, so.
The official answer is we know in January.
You know in January, great. And then after midterm, when is it, I would assume that it's calculated again
it is
somehow?
our best 28 weeks, and that isn't finalized until July, until this fiscal year's over.
That was the question.
Yeah,
then
so
on
if
the
you think about
back end,
January,
that's why I'm
this is
asking.
already past halfway through the year, and then you have July that tells us the rest of our money. It's a great formula, but
It's a
we've
difficult,
done it
it's a difficult
enough.
system, because we find out our actual money in January, and then we're already predicting for the next year by February. Late
Mhm.
February, March,
Yeah.
we're starting to look at that,
And
and
FTE
schools wanna know
numbers.
FTE for the next year by February, March. So it's a really
Yeah, and
complicated.
But in the end, to me, it's not necessarily rocket science, just because,
You've been doing it forever.
well, we know, we kind of guesstimate, the really key is how many kids we're gonna have. In our world, the bummer is that we've been losing kids every single year, one, because of our just attrition of nobody's having babies anymore, everybody else is of age, and when they're moving in, they're not having babies. And the other one is we have a growth in charters, right, and we have growth in online as well, so with COVID especially, so we've been losing little
Housing.
by little. And that's one of our biggest difficulties here, is that's why we have small schools, that's why we have, because when we were growing big, we needed all these schools. Now, when I was first here, I think our number was 15-1 that I was here for enrollment. Now we're down to 13-2. So that's how much less we have. And if you think about how much that's meant, to me, that's about $5 or $6 million a year less.
How many years is that?
Well, that started to go down significantly when we approved the charter schools for Idaho Arts Expansion and Gym Prep charters. They took
About 6 years
1,200
ago.
6 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1,200 students just right then and there. And then with some of these others, little by little in attrition, it's just gone down little by little.
So I got a question.
Yes.
When was the last time we ran out of savings? And
That was the year before I got here, which is why I'm here now.
so every year, how do you determine how much you save? Is it just leftovers from here and there, or how do you do that? And what do you estimate for? Do you think it's something we're going to be running out of because of the budget differences? Or?
So when I came on board, the year prior to me, they found out that they had misbudgeted some of the federal revenues that they got and didn't make the cuts that they should have years earlier. Mandy was very familiar with this because you were the president of the union at that time. And when it was all said and done, and we calculated it all, when I came on board and did the audit, this district was $6.4 million in the red. Never been done in the history of a school district in Idaho. They didn't know how to handle it. State didn't know how to handle it. Everybody was freaking out. We went through 2 superintendents, and then all of a sudden, well, we went through. When Tom came on board, right, and then he got over it by then, So at that
We're
point,
still recovering.
yes, but we got the patrons to help us with a one-time supplemental levy of 4.3. We moved out some debt and was able to do that, and then we did a crap ton of savings. We pulled a little bit out each year to put back in the fund balance, and now the board has there's a board requirement that we have at least 5% of revenues in our fund balance. If we don't have that, then that means, okay, we got a problem, and we got to stop, and when we start taking from other areas until we get that back up. So we have not had to dip below that since I've been here. We had a 5-year plan to get that up to the 5%. We made it in 4.
Yeah.
And reality of the situation, when you're talking $100 million general fund budget, 1% is $1 million. It doesn't take. I mean, that's the problem. Is that when it goes bad, it can go bad quickly. But if you know what you're doing, I mean, the reality is we put a lot more budgetary controls. We monitor a lot better, and it's just we understand what we're doing.
Yeah, what I'd like to, I do have budget concerns us coming up, but unlike that situation, that we're aware of where they are, and hopefully we'll get to those, as the AD enrollment shift is one, the end to ESSER funds is one, our supplemental levy coming up is one, and then our title funding dropping is one as well. So anyways, we'll keep going, but we're aware of some of the difficulties ahead of us.
Yeah, so with the best 28 weeks, one way I look at this is, here's over the last 10 years, it's actually longer, I use an average of the last 10 years of best 28 weeks. When you look at how much we actually go down little by little in best 28 weeks, we're at 95, 99%, 99.53, 98.9. This is a little bit less. We have our best 20 weeks is a little bit less than our first 10 weeks, right? And so other than last year was the odd one where we actually got more. So the kids were coming in and stuff, and I think what was happening is kids were sick of being online, so they started coming in halfway through the year. So we got those enrollments, but we haven't obviously got this figure yet for this year.
Oh, I have
of
a
what that would
question.
be. Yes.
Is NOVA funded as a daily, do we?
Nova's funded just like everybody else.
I was just
It's
gonna
in
make sure,
enrollment.
so they look at it, I'm right, that being online is like a button.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
Yeah, so we have that kid has an EUID number like anybody else.
Just want
As
to
long
make
as
sure.
that kid participates daily.
Got it.
We have different requirements for different
each
ways of having
program.
to show.
got it.
But yeah, it's just the same. And that's one of the reasons we created Nova. So those that didn't want to come back in our environment, we had a place for them
Yep,
instead of
and
going
you
to a
can still,
competitor.
yep, I love it.
So we
Yep.
kept them in our environment. So what I do is I take that percentage and weighted average of 10, and then I basically times that by, and this is what we're anticipating getting. This is, oops, I got the wrong numbers here. Yeah, so anticipating how much we're gonna get per year on, for our discretionary and everything. So I'm gonna go out of here. And I want to show you real quick what the difference is in today's numbers for enrollment versus attendance, because we've already talked about it. So, so our state, because we're still in that weird world, so they still did both calculations for us. They did the enrollment side, and then they did an ADA side. And in our world, in an actual ADA, if we were at ADA right now, remember the other number was 667? Oops, page 2.
0.2.
Right here, 621.83. Now, don't worry about this other one here, but let's just, yeah. So it is significantly less. And when I tell you it's $150,000 per unit, that's what potential ADA issue could be for this.
So moving from 667 to 604 or 605?
Yeah, don't worry about this bottom part. There's a protection here. It's this calculation I don't think is right.
so-
But Jeff, you are reading that correctly.
Yeah.
Yes, that's where we would have dropped to. Now, we do have some protection in there that will help us from that big of a fall
1 year.
for 1 year. But the big drop that you're seeing is what every district is experiencing across the state, which is why it's a $119 million hit.
So 150,000 per unit, you said? What was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was, but I
It's
still
about
wanna.
$6 million.
I would
Did
say
you say
not
6
every
million?
district in the state's
Well, yeah,
Did you say
feeling
that?
it as bad, I think.
No, but it's
Yes.
119
Yeah.
million, yeah,
I gotta pull
I think
it
it'll
up.
vary, but
So
across the state is addressing decline in revenue.
one thing I will admit, and then this is where I'm gonna counteract what you're saying here in a second, because here's what happens in our environment. And I've been trying to steer clear of the protection calculation comments, and here's why it matters. In our world, a district is protected if they dip below 97% of the previous year.
I think I remember you
Okay.
explaining this. at
That
the very beginning.
97% is fine, and that's where this little bit is we usually take a little bit out of each of ours, because we have to pay that internally as districts. The state doesn't pay it. We put into a fund as districts to put into that, to pay for that 97%. Usually what that's for is you got, somebody over in Emmett, the plant went down, everybody moved, and you're like, oh my God, we got all these salaries, I can't even do anything, how do I do it? And the state's like, no, we'll take care of you for a year until you can get your budget right sized the next year. So that's 97%. In our world, at 667, that's about 640, 645. Okay? The issue is, exactly like I said, every district has to put in to pay for that. So you see how much we have, that's 40 something. West Data's 150, Boise's another 100. So these small districts who might have been actually really close to their ADA and stuff where they normally would, also have to pay in for our protection as well. So they could lose upwards of 4 to 5 units on a small district. That's a killer.
It just shatters their budget.
It really does. And that's where we've been saying, now that we're here in enrollment, because kids aren't coming in our world, if it's just the big cities, it is what it is, it hits everybody in the state. And that protection blows everything up. It's funded internally, so the state just basically has $119 million less in costs, because we have that much less in units going out, and we have to fund it internally. That's the frustration we have as a district, and most people don't understand. They think we're just crying to cry. And so this is a real big problem for us, is this going back to ADA. And if we were back to normal, where kids were normal, it wouldn't be that big a deal, because that 667 was really close to where we were before, when we were in ADA funding before the pandemic.
Okay, so what I hear you guys saying, just to make sure that I'm following the conversation to where we are now, is that your concern is, and what you've been, I totally get you showed us how we were funded, that was really good.
Yeah.
But now that we're moving, because post-COVID world, we don't have that same attendance as what we did, is it's gonna feel like even a bigger hit than what it was. Now where I'm a little confused, so I wanna ask the question is, are you, I hear you, I'm looking at the difference of 604.91 and 621.83. But what I hear you saying is that it's not gonna be that big of a drop, or are you saying it's that big of a drop?
It could potentially be that big of a
Okay.
drop. Yeah, and let me just put in for, like I was saying on this calculator right here, this is that's this one here, let's go last year's. I'm just gonna do the state tie out the revenue to actual. Alright, so assuming we would have been 88 this year, and I'm just gonna use the 621 to be nice. That was $5.5 million just in that. You go down $7 million in total we would have lost this year if we would have been ADA. That's not including the potential that we would have to put in for protection.
But you're talking about this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would.
Yep.
As of July 1st, it will be this.
Yes, potentially.
Yes.
That is
You're getting
the
You've got it.
that is the millions of dollar question that we're running into right now, which is making things very difficult for budgeting this year. Because the state giveth, but the state also gave us in an area where it's very restricted. We give it to you in these areas here.
Right.
We don't spend it there, we take it back. And so they did give us a little bit discretionary. I'll show you that here in a second. But it's a big deal. This ADA conversation is not something now. The one thing I have talked to a couple board members at the State Board of Education. One thing they're looking at doing, and I can't promise, and they can't promise whether or not they can make this happen. They're talking about potentially trying to tweak these divisors here, because they have the power to do that. They don't have the power to override again because there's no longer a pandemic emergency thing that they can do. But they do have the power to manipulate these ratios that will help all of us get our unit counts up reasonably close to where we were before.
And the state board would have to approve it at an open meeting, and they would also have to disclose that they'd had this conversation with multiple board, business managers, cause they function under the same regulations and rules that you do.
Yep.
Just like they are not required to approve that modification either.
And they don't know, there is some backlash when hearing that at the state level with legislators too, so it's a back and forth, and so we don't know. I can't promise that that's gonna happen. If that happens, then we're in a much better situation. The only thing that's saving us is literally we're sitting on one more year of ESSER funding.
So, sorry, Trustee Kirkman, well, it was no questions, I just wanna make sure because it seems like there's actually a bunch more that you still need to cover, am I reading that correctly?
Okay.
Okay,
Got an hour.
okay.
Yeah.
And only because we do at
Yeah.
6 have to stop, and I just wanna make sure you get all of your information out.
No, this next year is gonna be rough for all school districts, and I think that's what it's gonna take for maybe the legislatures to see what effect this actually has. I think everybody can talk about with the potential, and this is why we're doing this, and whatever, and everybody has their own reasons for going back to ADA. But I think actually getting through this next year, maybe actually seeing the effects of how this funding is maybe what it's gonna take, unfortunately. But anyways, that's
So-
my opinion, and we'll just
so-
move forward.
Greg mentioned there's 4 potential cliffs we have. First potential cliff is because of ADA.
Got it, Cliff 1.
Yep. So this is where we're anticipating this year. We're estimating a 37 unit decline in ADA because of ADA. So where I'm getting that number is, remember the 97%. When you talk 97% of this equals this times 0.97. So that's 647 units. So theoretically, if no one else had problems, it was just us, we would be no less than 647, okay? The problem is because we have to pay in to Bonneville, Boise, West Ada, all those big school districts like us that are gonna be super low. I'm anticipating another 17 units that we're probably gonna have to pay. It's not as low as the 621. We're trying to do some things where we're looking at, well, how can we maximize as much as we can? What incentives can we give families to come, especially that first 10 weeks and that, but it is something we have to think about, right? It's a bummer. It's a real big bummer because there's really good money that the state gave us this year. And so, and that's the real unfortunate part. So that ADA, 37 units is a lot. So here's the deal. That 37 units is also, I mean, that unit count is literally 1 year protection. So if it stays the same, it could go down even further next year.
And we're talking about $5.5 million right there, right?
Five-
Yeah, it's
5
a lot of
million.
money.
Yeah, I just did.
This is where I was hoping, so I'm just gonna look at, so I was hoping it would be around there. So that's $14 million, let's say 14.6, and instead for 9.8, yeah.
Yeah, so even using the savings and,
Yeah.
because we still have to, if the savings are depleted.
So here's what happens if we were to go to 0, and the same thing that happened to us before, we couldn't even make summer payroll. So we had to do a payday loan in order to do what we needed to do over the summer in order to do it. We were getting $6.5 million payday loans for the first 2 years I was here from deal letters.
Wow.
Just
So-
to make it to work.
And just a little more context too, the 3.3 million we have on supplemental levy, that is a ramification of what happened 10 years ago, because they used that money to help bolster the general fund, 3.3 million worth. Now we equate that to salaries, because it just makes it a better understanding about 45 positions.
Well, that's what it's gonna affect.
But it supports this from that issue from 10 years ago still, and that's why we have it every 2 years. So I know we're talking general fund here, but our supplemental also plays into this.
Absolutely. When we deplete that savings, we're not, I mean, potentially we don't even have enough money to replenish that savings at 5%.
Correct. You'd actually have to
It
suspend
took
your
us 4
policy.
years to replenish, because we got back to 0 almost with the supplemental levy and some budget savings we were able to do even that year. But every year we tried to save an additional $1 million to get it back up, and it was difficult. We basically had to take $600,000 right off the bat for teachers, just that wasn't even available for raises. So, and we did furloughs, we tried, all sorts of things to try to get us there. So, it's not a fun adventure whatsoever. It's one of those discussions we hope not to have to get to.
I'm gonna excuse myself, I have to take a work call. I'll be right back in.
Okay.
But I think it's important to know that, that as those funds are used, our policy basically says, that's our first, like, this is the lowest we're gonna go, so if it dips below that, we're immediately putting into our budget, where are we taking that money and moving it?
Yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but where do you find the money to replenish?
So at that point in time, you give a little less in
Yeah.
salaries.
It's gotta come from
It's
somewhere.
hiring
It
less,
does,
and
yeah.
it's giving less raises.
Yeah.
And so you have larger class sizes, overcrowded schools.
And that's where some of those mitigating factors, schools,
Right.
like you said, class sizes, furloughs, all that, whatever it might take.
And
Whatever
the
it takes.
risk is if you keep the number of teachers you have and just pay less, now you are off with all the other districts in the area that are gonna pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000
And then
more.
you're
And-
seeing,
And you can't do that.
Yeah,
I mean, ideally,
No,
you
I
want
mean,
to,
we
but
You just
no,
don't, you won't give the raises.
It's a gift,
Yeah.
yes, they can't make, certificated staff cannot make less in the
yeah,
same
and I
position
think
than they did the year
we all
before.
understand that,
Yeah.
but,
Are you
I
sure?
actually read that, and it doesn't say that.
I believe
So
they
we
have,
actually read
I
it
think
the
that's
other day.
something you might wanna talk to
It's
legal
kind of a weird
about.
thing, we've always been told that, but Gwen and I found
From
it in the
legal.
code. It was like, that doesn't say what we say it says. So anyway,
well, that's a discussion.
but
we-
anyway,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
but
we
anyway,
hopefully don't ever wanna get to that discussion,
Right.
so that we just want you to know the severity of where we are with the switch and some of the cliffs, but let's move on, Randy,
So,
'cause we got an
yeah,
hour.
so here's the other thing, so the state did give it, like I said, the state gave great money this year. There's two areas where they gave us really good money this year. The first is they gave a substantial amount in pay raises. They gave the career ladder amount up, and so this, like I said, when I was talking about this was, last year was like 40,000, now it's 41,118. The other thing they did, right when JFAC, Joint Finance Appropriations Committee came on, that no one knew, see I did it,
thank you,
that no one knew about, they added $6,359 to every rung of the revenue calendar as well. So they basically increased every rung almost $7,000. The hard part for us on this is they didn't go back and change and amend the statute, but then they told us our desire is that you give it all the teachers and you will have raises or we're gonna get mad. But that was basically what they said. So we have a little bit of discretionary in what that means, what that doesn't mean. In our world right now, we can't pay a teacher less than 41,000, 43,000 in these rungs, these two rungs here. But some think, and I tend to believe it, if we do not include the additional 6,300, then we will also be not doing what the legislator wanted us to do in the as a
That goes back to that legislative intent.
Yep, and that's the thing, and it basically, and we got a bunch of, but they just didn't have time, because they did it so late, they basically didn't have time to go back and amend statute. So, so what that did.
I would argue that they could have taken as long as they wanted to do it right. So, I would say that they chose to not go back and amend it because of the amount of time it would have taken them to do so.
Yeah, they wanted to get out.
Yeah.
So they were more important of overriding other things instead. But anyway, so what that did is it significantly increased the amount of money that we got for teachers. I mean, it's a lot. When you look, and even with the decline in the units, we still have $4 million to be able to give the raises this year, right? Now, if we were 664 like we thought we would be, that's $5.5 million that we basically would be given raises for our certified teachers. So in our world, that difference, that $2.1 million, you see it over here, that $2.1 million, we're gonna actually use ESSER funds to make up that difference. Because what we're gonna do is we're actually not going to reduce the number of teachers we have this year. Because we have the ESSER funds, that's what it's for. We basically, there's belief, they're telling us, and this is 3 years in the making, that they are gonna get a new funding formula next year. They promised us that will be a good thing for us, and so we're hoping that we didn't have to lay off 50 teachers in order to make it work. if
Can
that,
you really hang your hat on that?
well, if
though?
it doesn't happen, at that point in time is when we start going down the avenues of what do we do?
This is what makes me nervous, because we have a really hard decision. Do you let federal money sit there, not use it, and cut staffing now, and have class sizes be higher? Or do you use the federal dollars the year we have? And so it made sense for us to try to use the federal dollars that we have. But it's hard to have staffing on soft money, and that's what's difficult.
That's exactly.
And this expands the issue, or makes it worse, because we already had 3 million of that on supplemental levy. And now we have this switch on us, which otherwise we'd be cutting drastically teaching positions,
Yeah,
administrative
if we didn't have
positions.
ESSER, we would.
So is
Classified
SR
positions.
Cliff 2?
ESSER is cliff 2.
ESSER is clip 2.
So ESSER has to be fully expended by September 30th, 2024.
So my question would be is, and I could be thinking about this incorrectly, but wouldn't you be using that money to pacify and plan for the latter? Well, let me see fourth cliff. I need to see all 4 cliffs.
Well, but he just mentioned, if you use it, it's soft money. I mean, if you wait and none of this changes, and then what do you? we
No,
lose
I'm
the
saying
money if
you'd
it's
use
not
it
used
now,
to ESSER?
but
It'll go away.
shouldn't we be,
So
no,
it
I'm
just sits
saying,
there, and you're not using it, and then you have high class sizes, and you have all the needs that
Yep.
our district has, and then you have money sitting there not using it. That feels ethically, morally wrong.
no, we would use it, but I'm saying that pacifies your issue. The use of this
Right
money
now.
is going to happen, but it's a pacifier.
Just for-
That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely,
It
it's a
pacifies your
pacifier.
issue.
It's masking
That's what-
the
that's
real
what it's
issue
called.
that we have right
Pacifier
now.
money, yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So our plan next year, and I apologize, I was trying to get it in before I got this. Our plan next year is to take this money that we need for our teachers to maintain their teacher class into class size. We have an additional 23 FTE that secondary still need
Yep.
in our ESSER. We have some VPs and deans is what was requested from you guys in our elementary world. That's another $1 million. We've got a bunch.
The board didn't request that,
Oh, I
Randy.
thought
That
it
was
was-
something the administration did.
Oh, I thought the administration.
Based on the need that we
Okay.
heard around our dysregulated students. But the board did hear about the dysregulated student
Yes.
need. That's how the administration chose to go ahead and address that, was by hiring some deans and VPs on soft money.
So we're looking at an additional, so the last few years, we've had $12 to $14 million on ESSER funds of some sort.
Yeah.
And now this year is no different, and next year we're looking about the same. So the 2 we have left are ESSER and ESSER 3 learning loss, ESSER 3 and ESSER 3 learning loss. And so we anticipate utilizing about the same amount next year for both. And every bit of those are been spoken and then some.
If there is any positives, again, is we're aware. And so we began to communicate to our staff, hey, we're dropping in general revenue. We're having to use soft money to maintain our staffing levels. There is no guarantee that our staffing levels and the positions that we're able to put towards some of the needs in the district are going to be there next year.
That's a double-edged sword too, when you have to have that conversation now.
Yeah. It's just trying to get the awareness out
But
there.
it's good, it's good. I mean,
Exactly.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's good to have that.
And like Greg said, it's like, what happened to us before is literally my county manager came to somebody and said, you know, we don't have any money in the bank. They're like, what do you mean we don't have any money in the bank? That was literally how it was found out. And they
Oh.
didn't have any idea that the budget was that bad
No.
until they started looking into it.
Makes perfect sense that we're in some of these scenarios after being funded like we were for COVID. But I do want to make sure we cover cliff 3 and 4.
Yeah, we will.
Okay.
Yep. So the other area we got great money for was a classified. This first year since the 90s, we've been yelling at the state forever that says there's no way I can hire an IT person for $24,000. I can't even hire a para for $24,000. This is ridiculous, right? So they actually did something this year. They gave 4% on their base. Remember that little $24,000? They gave 4% on the base. And they infused an additional $97 million that got spread across everything in the state. So what that did is that moved that $24,000 up to $38,000. Again, not the best, but it's still way more than we've ever had. When we look at it, we will need to, because remember I said if we spend less, then they don't pay us.
Right.
So it's only to our benefit to pay our people the most to expand, to get as much as we have. But we are looking at substantial raises for our classified staff this year, for next year. And that will help us. I think the lowest at that point in time will be about $16 an hour.
And the funding for the classified is coming from the state.
Yep.
Is that a required expenditure from the state for that for the
It is, so if we do not spend $9.1 million next year, basically at this calculation, they will give us the ladder of lesser.
And I think these are those salient points that don't often get communicated or understood by the general public, is that this money has to be spent on this. We
Yep.
can't just say, no, we're not gonna pay you $20 an hour or whatever, and we're gonna put that in savings. We can't do that. These are mandates.
So I agree with that, but I also think there's the conversation in between, do we spend the money on the staff that we have, or do we hire more in our classified positions? I do think that there's that in between. Just so we're not missing that conversation here, like, yes, we have money to spend, but in any good business, it doesn't mean because you have extra money that you necessarily take what you have. You assess what you have and decide how that money has to be spent first. So when does that conversation occur?
So we're talking about the same way. One of the issues that we have right now is that there's two different things that really hurt us in that. So just similar to your regular business, there's always a time where it's better to spend in your current employees, maybe even work overtime, than it is to hire somebody new. And most of the reason, there's that reason for it, it's that cliff, that little cliff, right?
Yep.
And each one, and one of the biggest reasons for us right now is, even though it is the best thing for us, and it's the best thing for our employees, but our health insurance is $13,750 per employee next year, regardless if they take it or not. So that's just right off the top. If we hire one more employee, that's that much more. I could have given that much more to an employee here and not hired another person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I want to make sure that we're all on that same page with you as we look at what we do when this money comes through, because that's such a quick turnaround time for you to decide what to do with money. And if you, I don't know, I can't picture why, but I know that there's something there that I need to say. I just don't know the word yet, but it'll come to me. Probably I'll call you next week. That's how it'll happen. I'll be driving and I'll be like, that's what it was.
As much as we'd say we'd love to hire 50 more paras,
not even saying 50 more
paras. We tried to do that with our K-3 lit, but I think we got hired, like half of them hired by big time school started, and it's just some of these positions are
but
hard
the problem is that it's hard to get money off like that. We're watching it happen now. When we do use money and we inflate it to as far as we can go because we will lose it, then what happens is that the cliff is even higher. Not that I'm saying we wouldn't spend it. What I'm saying is in the in-between of when we're refunded that way, if we spend all of that money, you're just not going to increase. The 16 is a pretty competitive wage for some of our classified at this point.
I think it's just trying to find a sweet spot.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I just want to hear how that conversation goes.
Here's the one part I will tell you. Classified, I am doing the budget based on the 630 number. The certified are the ones that I'm using ESSER funds to make up that difference that we lost. Classified, if we were to stay 630 going forward, we had no problem maintaining our classified salary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm not going above and beyond assuming, because if that was the case, I would go like this, 664. Instead of the 9.6, 9.1, it'd be 9.6, right? So that's an additional $500,000 that theoretically I would put in ESSER if we were doing the same thing, right? Well, in this case, we didn't really have a lot. There are some positions that I need to move over, some sped positions, some in tech I have to move over anyway. That is going to do exactly what you're saying.
That's what I'm asking.
But I didn't want to get our classified over either, because at that point in time, it is difficult, one, to find a classified person, and two, I wanted to make sure we were shored up, that we didn't have to worry about doing a lot of layoffs in the classified section, because we're already pretty bare bones in our classified as it is. So we're right-sizing in our classified revenue now. So our expenses aren't going to be higher than what could be at the 630 mark. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It answers the question. I just want to make sure that we're not, it's what I hated about ESSER, right? It was great that when people are on unemployment, they got an additional $600 a week. It was great. It was great. And I want you to understand, I was happy for those people. I really was. But at the end of the day, as an employer, it's really hard to wean somebody off of that, right? So then you're looking for that payday. And that's what these types of funding situations do to corporations, companies of all size, profit or not. Yeah. And so I just want to make sure that every time we're funded, it's not that you get more money, because nobody can keep that up.
Well,
it's an endless playing
and that's how it's been forever.
Yeah, it's a non-sustainable game.
We've had
but this is a different amount of when we saw ESSER funds come through, not saying that these are ESSER funds, totally getting that we are in a cost of living raise, totally getting that that's where we're going. In case somebody's watching this meeting, I totally get that we need to fund teachers and staff. But just in case, because I do. But what I'm saying is what most people don't understand, especially if they've never learned how to properly budget, is that realistically you can't live like if we take all of that money and we need more, but we just pay more but need more and the money's gone. That's all I'm saying. Not saying that you didn't think about it.
Yep.
Just want to hear how we got there.
Yep, and that's, I was already trying to take that.
Got
out
it.
of the
Okay, good.
situation.
Just totally.
I didn't want to
the
pay
question.
over and above what we did. Our classified,
Totally.
by doing this, and our admin to an extent are gonna be the same way.
Got it.
So we will be fine in both our admin ranks and our classified. It's really our teacher ranks, and that's really what affects mostly is our class sizes. And we felt our numbers we're not good enough to increase class sizes at this point. So we're really using ESSER to reduce class sizes still. That's basically what we're trying to do with ESSER. We're not making up other areas in our budget with this ESSER. We're really just making it up with the classified salaries.
Okay.
I mean, with the certified salaries.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
we are right sizing everything else with our budget.
Okay.
Based on the reduction there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Okay. All right, and so
Thank
kind
you.
of going down a little bit more, the other area where they gave us, and I'm gonna scoot over here to the left a little bit. There's two areas here. This is, I overrode this this is operational for some reason. I don't know why I did that. These are the years that we get different money for our operational funding. Remember, this is our best 28 weeks, and this is the stuff that pays for like our gas, our heat, our overages and our other pay, our tech contracts, and all of that stuff, right? So we get a certain amount of money for health insurance, and we get a certain amount of money for operational. As you can tell with the state for 4 years, because we had ESSER, believe, you guys don't need any additional operating money. And how many of your guys' contracts went up in your, not even to mention with us, we classified, but our salary,
Everything.
our power went up, everything. So
Everything.
We've been kind of going backwards operationally for years and living off ESSER because of this. Now, for the first time, they finally started bumping up our operational and gave us a pretty good chunk of money for operational. So we will see about a $2 million increase to our operational funds. Now, 1.34 it goes directly to health insurance, and with the increase the state had this year, which they promised me is probably a 3-year increase, so it's a one-time for 3 years.
This is promised.
I know. It's a little different at the state where they just give you the money directly, right? For us, and Jennifer she goes, I think we're good. I think this number is going to keep us there for 3 years, but it was a big hit. It was 8 or 9% increase. So we're going to need about another $200,000 or $300,000 to basically take that. So we have out of that $758,000. We're going to take that to make up the rest of our health insurance. But we're not planning on moving because it's amazing, and I think that's helped us retain employees and get new employees.
Yeah, your health insurance
Yeah,
is Cadillac.
and the open market could have been 12, 14%.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
On that note, on the insurance, so you pay for the insurance whether they take it or not.
Yep.
The previous insurance plan that you had before the state, was that the case
No,
also?
so you only paid for what you got.
For whoever took it?
Yeah, the hard part about budgeting for that insurance though, is if, as a family, it cost our district more than if you were
Right.
single. So I had no idea what you were gonna select as an employee. So if you selected and they were in the federal funds, then all of a sudden they would get hit with a $13,000 bill, whereas somebody with the lower end was getting an $8,000 bill.
So it's much easier to budget to this.
It is, even though it's more money.
Exactly,
This is the easiest thing for me to do because I know how many
You know
employees,
what the cost is gonna
1,330
be, yep.
employees are eligible, and that's how many I budget for. So
I-
it's super easy.
If somebody can't see what a win that is as an
Yeah.
employee, I don't even know what to say. I pay private health insurance. I can help you out. I can let you know what that looks like.
Well, and it's and we do have people that say no, and a lot of it's because they've got like TRICARE or something. already
Totally
in the
get it.
military.
Totally get
So
it. It's just a
there's
great.
always reasons,
It's great
but
though. It is a great
It
opportunity.
is,
It
yeah. And so and
Incentive,
that's
I
where
guess,
we
not
are.
opportunity, but incentive.
So we are, like I said, we are getting new money. So even going down, so we're getting good new money. The problem is they tell us where to put it, and the unit calculator is killing us. And that also drives a lot of other things that we also do, and some of the special money that they give us. And so it's just a matter of going through some of those calculations and figuring out how it works. We do that for a living. That's what I do. It is what it is. So we will be okay, and the budget we establish will work. It's just that next year we do have, so we've talked about the first cliff, which is the ADA. Second cliff is ESSER. The third cliff is potentially our supplemental levy. Because remember, we have now lost the ability to do our March election. And if we do not pass a supplemental levy in November, if we go out again, we will need to find at least $8 million worth of expenditure spots or do away with a lot of things that are on the levy, which $3.3 million of that is on salaries.
Just a reminder, what's on the levy is the salary position, so 3.3 million in staffing, and that's across the board. And then you have curriculum adoptions are on there, technology, all the teacher and student devices is on there, and then you have transportation, early childhood, athletics upgrades to some of those facilities and things.
Dr. Russell, can we ask that you send an email to the entire board on everything that's on the supplemental levy?
Sure.
Just so that we have that fresh, so the entire board is aware. Because I do think that those are really big talking points, and I'd like to make sure that everybody is aware of what is covered on those levies.
And if you could include the breakdown of the cost.
Yes.
Yep.
How much
I can do
money
that.
is associated with it.
Thank you.
Yep, and that's a big deal to me. I mean, this next year, we got one more year, right? But what that will do is it means the next year, we will have to budget without $8 million. Now, some of that stuff we could probably get rid of and not do for a while. So curriculum, we don't have curriculum money. But we still have devices we have laces on. We still have things that we want to do, it'll make things very, very difficult for us.
So looking at a calendar, if the levy is passed in November, if it's on the ballot in November, it's all ifs, that would go starting in July 1st.
For the next 2 years.
Next 2 years. So
Yep.
this levy currently will run out June 30th.
Correct.
All right.
Up next.
Next year.
Next year, right.
Yep, and so the worry I have is similar to what happened to us before. We lost by a few points, so we win again in March and passed it.
Yeah, we don't have.
Well, this
that.
time we have, if we don't pass in November, we have to wait till May.
So-
And right now, we're trying to finish budget season. Imagine trying to
Well,
have $8 million in this.
and then the reality, what we'd have to do is we'd have to tell schools to not hire because we don't know if we'd get it in May. Because we can't sit there and say, schools go ahead, hire teachers and get contracts and things ready and signed and then say, oh, we don't have it, we're cutting you back. And so it really makes planning for the school year really difficult by losing March. But we have a shot in May. We could run it in May. If it, for some reason, it doesn't run or it doesn't go in November. So there's two opportunities, but May makes it pretty hard.
For this
If
fiscal year.
if it passes in May, when is it funded?
So it's still funded the next 2 years.
Okay.
So
But
you
it's
could
funded in July
theoretically do
1st,
one
though.
for a year. I mean, if you just pass it, you tell it which years it's for. So yeah, so if it funds in May, it would start that July 1.
Okay, so.
Yeah,
couple months.
the hard part is the next one after that is August. We did have one, so we had to go in August. Mandy was here for that. It was a small one, but you can't, now you're into years. So now you're
Yeah.
like, okay, what things did we not do? Well, if you didn't hire already, you can't get a teacher at that time.
Right.
So it's like, so it makes it really difficult. So that March was a killer, and it really was. So that's our third cliff.
Okay.
And our fourth cliff is our federal funds. I mean, obviously, not just ESSER, but our federal funds, little by little, have been going down every single year because our poverty rankings in Nampa have been going down. So even though we have the same base of students, because of the people moving into Nampa, our census is different, and our money is different in Nampa, which creates that different type of, that role of how the state looks at us for funding.
That's part of the cliff is the less money. But the other issue comes when the state says, okay, now you have to raise salaries, which is great. We want to do that. When you have a limited dollar amount in your title funds, you can't hire as many staff under that because you're having to pay staff more. So it compounds, if that makes sense.
It does.
So when I was a principal, I used to have a certain dollar amount that I could hire staff in. And at $41,000, I can hire a certain amount of staff, but at $50,000, I can't hire as many because it won't go as far. So it does create
That's
a
hitting us
cliff.
next year.
So tell me how I'm confused. I was under the aware that our status or our socioeconomical status, if I even said that correctly, came from like the attendance in schools, but what I hear you saying is that it's as the community grows in wealth.
So
Tell me,
there's the
how did they
census.
determine the
So
census?
the
Yep.
census also goes to the state, that information, and the second part is our free and reduced lunch numbers.
Okay.
The issue with our free and reduced lunch numbers is we just haven't been getting the people to fill it out as well. And so our numbers have gone down dramatically. We had 2 years of free, so no one filled out anything.
Yeah.
And then this year, I think we were at 70-something% forever, and now we're in the 50s.
Yeah,
That's just because people aren't
filling it out.
people aren't filling the forms out because for so many years you didn't have to. And now that requirement is, I have to fill this out. It's just harder to get people to understand the purpose of it. What does it do? And then secondly, to get those forms. And think about high school, having high school students have their parents fill that out. They just don't as much. Maybe because they don't even eat on campus or whatnot.
Right.
I think Nampa, they said at one time was, well, let's put it in perspective. I think West is 60-something right now, 70%.
Yeah, I don't know.
All those kids fade into basically Nampa. Nampa's 24. And it's not because those kids change any they just don't fill it out because they're not eating at Nampa right now.
Well, sure, or they're getting a $1.50 sandwich across the street. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff that happens in that.
50 sandwich, where's that?
I think it's a check in the box. I think it's like, when I was a kid, it was like $1. It's
Red
somewhere in
Steer?
there, yeah.
Red Steer.
Red Steer, yeah.
Marcus got a question.
Yeah, so how much money are we, do we usually get for federal funds, and what are we expecting if we, for this cliff?
So right now, we actually kind of got lucky because we just got our numbers last Thursday, preliminary numbers. Our total one, we were thinking we were going to lose about $600,000. We came in, we were actually right about even to what we get this year, the preliminary. So we're kind of lucky, but like what Greg said, we just raised the price on every single employee $10,000 potentially on total cost. So when you only get a $100,000 allocation for, like, say, Endeavor, now instead of being able to hire a para and a teacher, I can hire a teacher. So does that make sense? And now, like what you're saying with our classified, well, maybe we use that extra money in our classified to keep that para in line, but not every school was doing that. So it's just
Totally
everybody's
get it.
all over the place on where we do those
Totally
hiring.
get it. Yeah, totally get it. That's what's so hard about an organization
Yeah.
our size. That's why it's actually really difficult to have those conversations. Realistically, we could have 12 different conversations and they would be similar but different based on how, our
This was the first year that we were flat, though. We had dropped in
We dropped
17,
500 every
18,
single year.
18, 19, 19, 20,
We were
20, 21.
astonished to see that.
I mean, it's been consistent year after year, losing federal dollars. So to see that was a little bit of a surprise, but again, exasperating because of the higher amount that we need to pay. They're not higher. That money doesn't go as far.
We had instructional coaches that were partially paid out of Title I this year. We actually had to move every one of them out, reduce size, and pull them to some other funding just to keep them on staff. Because we just weren't sure, and all the other raises. I mean, when you're talking $3 million in salary, a 10%, let's say, increase. I mean, that's a lot. So that's $300,000. I mean, it's like boom, just for doing nothing other than hiring the exact same person, right? And so it's just, I mean, it hits us, and we have all the migrant funding, we have LEP funding, we have all that stuff, that's out there. And so what's really hurting us as well right now is our food service. As much as we want to pay to get them, because you know how much you pay at McDonald's, right? So we have to pay that much, but we just don't have the participation as much anymore, and things are just not working. So these increases in these costs of insurance has really hurt our budget in food service, which we've never had that difficulty before. So we're having to be real creative of how we're kind of trying to work that role as well.
Is there any way to make adjustments with the food costs due to the decrease
Yeah.
in
So in
students?
food service directly, there's two ways of money coming in, right? There's one of cost of our kids pay if they're not reduced or free, right? And then there's the amount that the federal pays for a free and reduced lunch. The issue right now is that the amount that the federal did for their increases was negligible in relationship to the cost of inflation in our environment and food service. So that was a big part, and so the hope and the bummer is we don't get those numbers until July. So we're trying to build a budget now based on the same numbers, and we luckily have a pretty good sizable fund balance in there that we're able. But USDA is one of the few areas where they actually mandate a maximum amount of fund balance as opposed to a minimum.
Yeah, maybe.
We can only have 3 months of operating in there in order to be under the law.
Any 3 months.
Yeah, well, it's an average of the year,
Average,
3 months, but, so, I don't know, so how do you, I mean, so basically they want us to have this low as possible, but yet leave that staffing, and it's a very hard one, and I think our person there, Michelle's doing a fantastic job, and we're working on it, and we'll be fine for a couple more years, but we'll have to do some things, changes in the future if we.
And so Cliff 4 is food service specific.
No, Clip 4 is actually the federal funds, even if we
So
don't,
not just-
even if we get the same amount of money and increases, the salary goes up, because the state hasn't, they keep throwing it towards teachers, which is great, but every time they do that, it basically lessens the amount that we can provide teachers. A good example of that is our IDEA, our special ed right now. We're only gonna get, we're actually projected to lose 200,000 because of some of the way they were calculating in years past, they froze it. So that means $200,000 worth of salaries has to come to the general fund, because we can't get rid of IDEA because we're already understaffed there as it is. And all the pay raises on that money now, anything extra has to come back to the general fund, because I'm already maxed out in Medicaid and our IDEA Part B funds. So it's like, as soon as we're already maxed out of those funds, I can't get anywhere. The only other place to put it is the general fund. And in title funds and some of the, like migrant now, we can maybe hire some less people. But when you're talking our federal funds for IDEA and special ed, we get sued. I mean, that's how it is. We have a couple people that have a trait, that have one para to that trait every other.
Totally get it. Yep. No, totally
So, I
walk
mean,
those
that's a
programs. Totally grasp
$40,000
it.
person
Yeah.
walking around with one person. I mean, that's what we do. I mean, I'm not complaining.
Nope.
I'm just
Totally
saying
get
that's,
it.
that's
the
our
reality.
world.
I just
Right.
think that that's the cliff. Like all of your other 3 cliffs to me are really clear and simple. It's your
Yep.
4th cliff that when you're talking, what I hear
Mhm.
is that we are doing our very best to use the coffers that you have in every way that you can use them to make our funding magic happen. That's what I hear you
Yep.
saying right now. And that the loss of these federal funds will cause you to not be able to have some of those coffers maybe for what we need. Is that, am I hearing what
Yeah,
you're saying?
and what happens, and so.
Because all of these others are very tangible, like 37 units tangible, ESSER tangible, supplemental levy tangible.
Yep.
Kids not wanting to eat school at lunch, either A, our poverty level is going down, or B, there's alternative things that could have happened post-COVID because so many people are looking for, I mean, I don't know, right? Like,
Yep.
that's kind of intangible. So your 4th cliff, I'm having
It's
a hard
really
time finding the tangible.
The tangible on that is
Less people.
the amount of money isn't growing in our other federal funds to support the increases of cost and payroll associated with it.
Okay, that makes
The
way more sense.
tangible is the ability to hire less people, and that's important because if these other cliffs, any of them, materially, we're gonna need everybody that we can and every dollar source we can to hire people. And when we can't, because of the cost of hiring has increased, it just compounds the other 3 primary
Got
issues
it.
we have. That's what I wanted.
Got it.
us to-
It's a compound.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Well, the other 3 were definite. Like, okay, like they were definite.
Yeah, so we are maxing out our other federal funds. In typical world, we have $10 to $12 million in federal funds we operate off on a regular basis. $5 million of that is federal food service, but even then, that's how much goes through our environment. When people yell, "Let's get off federal funds," the only way to do that is maybe go supplemental levy. I mean, I don't know, but then people get mad at that. So it is
I
what
campaigned
it
like
is.
that. I said, if you don't like federal things, don't take federal funds. I did.
Exactly.
That's true. I mean, it's
But
true.
the realization.
The
that you're not
realization is
gonna
it's a
have
lot of
the
money.
Instructors that are needed, required.
Correct.
Is a better term.
The
For
risk.
certain things, for a
Correct,
segment of
that's
our
the risk.
population. I mean,
Yeah.
that is what it is.
And you'd be open to
There, I mean,
multiple
and
things
there's
at that
political
point.
discussion on it too. You don't accept federal funds. When I was a nonprofit in Boise, we didn't accept it because we didn't want federal government putting regulations on us, right? We have a lot of regulations on us that federal government
ton.
mandates, that if we weren't having federal funds, it wouldn't matter at all. Like if we didn't take any USDA funds, we could eat whatever the heck we wanted over there. We could have pizza every day that had candy on it. It wouldn't matter, right? But we don't have the money to subsidize it.
Yeah.
If our environment wants to subsidize, but the worry I have is we decide to do that, and I know it's probably not practical, we decide to do that and say, okay, we'll put it on a supplemental levy, but now we're at risk every 2 years
Oh, agreed.
doing that. It's
That
worse
was-
than what it is
That
now.
was tongue in cheek.
I know.
That was a tongue in cheek comment.
But if
Sorry.
you look at what happened at Coeur d'Alene right now, they've implemented a state of emergency because their supplemental levy is 25% of their budget, and they lost it. So now they're going the second time. If they do not do it, it's 25% of their budget. Coeur d'Alene is in dire straits right now.
Maybe if we had pizza with candy on it, it would increase our enrollment.
Maybe. Yeah.
They are running 2 supplemental levies, that's why it's 25%.
Yeah. But even then, it's still a lot. So,
Pizza
but yeah,
with
so
candy.
that's where we are in our environment. So my biggest
That
thing
was
with our
also tongue
guys
in cheek.
is the sky is falling to an extent because of ADA. ESSER sucks. We know we need to use it anyway, and we know we have a lot of staff. We've said that ESSER cliff's been there. We understand it. That to me is a much easier. It's gonna hurt, but the ADA thing is that's a part of this, the whole dichotomy here that didn't need to have happened, and that's where all of us are super frustrated.
Well, I think it's your ADA and your levy,
It's just
right?
a lot of
Yeah.
things hitting at once, the potential for a lot to hit at once. And
Potential.
we have to live on potential, what potentially could happen, and that's what makes it hard. Potentially, everything could work out great too. I mean, but if we're not aware, this district has had a history of having some financial difficulties.
No, I love that we're
We
having-
want to avoid that.
I love that we're having the conversation. I love that you guys are being candid. I love that you're having the conversation, and I love that you know where you're at financially. And I love that, yeah, this is healthy.
And I
Even
love,
though people may not see that, this is a healthy
Well, I just need
conversation.
people to know.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, and I love the fact that this helps me decide whether I wanna run for
It's like, nope,
No.
I'm out. It's like perfect. No,
Marco's gonna be on that roller coaster clear till it's time.
It's like,
Marco's
nobody-
whole life's different down there at that
That's
end.
when I go find another job too. Oh, it gets harder. Okay, thanks, bye. It's worked out pretty good for me initially because I could just give money back when we had money because everybody was so used to being poor for a while. So now not anymore.
Okay, so Dr. Russell, Mr. Dewey, is there anything else that you guys want the board to be aware of? I think this is great in understanding those 4 cliffs. I think it's really nice when we come into a meeting and you guys, we can say, hey, if we leave with nothing else, understand these 4 cliffs. But is there anything else that you would like to either explain or expand on? If not, I would love to take these last few minutes and give each trustee time to ask questions or discuss different points. So is there anything else?
It's the floor is yours. We are good at presenting what we have.
Okay, Trustee Kirkman?
Yeah, I wanna know, as much as you can provide, what are the mitigating, I know we've talked about quite a bit in here, the what ifs, but looking at these 4 financial cliffs, I think it's, and I appreciate your candid, but there's a lot of people who are gonna be asking, what if?
Yeah.
I mean, and so I guess what I'm looking for is potential mitigating things
Sure.
that the district can do.
Yeah, I can give you a few, and again, just some things that I've thought about and could expand upon this list. So the
And
first,
I'm sorry, that's all they are, it's just thoughts,
Just thoughts right now.
Nothing is going in.
Yeah,
We're not-
yeah, we don't want-
I'm actually gonna really quick before this comment is made. These right now are just ideas in the event because this board would like to hear that our administration is prepared. So Trustee Kirkman has asked a great preparatory question to our administration and they are gonna give us examples. It does not mean these things are happening.
in no order either, right? These are
Yeah,
just some
no
thoughts. So
That
the,
was
so the first one is a hope, right? But it's, will the state come with a different funding formula for next year? Now, there's been several funding formulas that came to the legislature. They haven't made it all the way. Understanding that $119 million was lost this year, there's a potential that there could be a new funding formula that could help with some of this. Another one has to do with our levy. What do we ask? If we do ask, if we don't ask, all that has ramifications, but the levy will have an impact on that. The second one would be staffing. We would probably start looking towards attrition, first of all. We wouldn't hire as many. And again, we were between typical year 80 to 100-ish staff. Somewhere in that number, we would look at not hiring back. We would look at probably a schedule change in our high schools because there is FTE in there that we believe, and we just talked to Bonneville last year to switch schedules that said there is a savings in there. It doesn't solve some of the other things we were hoping maybe in our schedule change, but financially it could be a thing that we could do there. We've talked about boundaries before. Having small schools, there's expenditures there and inefficiencies. That could be another solution we could look at. The last one, again, never want to go there again because I've lived it, would be looking at, some furlough days or cutting some costs, expenses that way. Cutting contracts could be another one, and looking at reducing some of the contract services, for example, our custodial services and things, and trying to cut some of that back like we did 10, 11 years ago, but again, don't want to live those days. So broad mitigation things that we could do, those are just a few that have crossed my mind.
What about the possibility, I know there was a discussion about funding a grant position, a grant writing position. Is that a possibility? What's the reality of getting funding from grants to mitigate some of these issues?
So
Possible issues.
I think that is one, and that's a good one. And we are looking at hiring that again on soft money, which is tough, but at least it could be a year to try. I was just actually talking with an administrator who's down in California. He mentioned their district had done a lot around grants, and often grants are specific, right? You can hire to maybe work with migrant folks, or you can hire with English language learners or students of poverty or whatever. But if you get a grant and you're able to hire 5, 6 positions out of that grant or whatever, that's 5 or 6 less that comes out of general fund or title fund, and so it is a mitigation strategy that we could try and use.
My only concern with that is generally every grant I've seen is a 1-year grant. Even like the COPS grant we got is a 1-year grant. It's generally not a multi-year grant. So we start doing that, then we have to make sure we apply for it every single
Still a
year.
strategy, just lower.
It scares me even more than a supplemental levy, mind you.
And then you have to remember what classification of employee you're putting on that, because if it's someone with a category 3 contract that has property rights versus.
And if that grant went away.
Right, it's those little things.
Another thing I should mention would be probably athletics activities. Those things would have to go to a pay to play, pay to participate is a likely thing that we'd have to look at.
Very likely. If we didn't have the supplemental, we have $350,000 that goes towards all that right now. That basically, or more, because we have the busing as well. So we haven't been charging for busing at all for years.
I know, it's been
And we
amazing.
haven't been, we hardly.
I'm a recipient of that no
Quite
charge
a bit
busing.
to secondary schools and elementaries for sports and no activities in that too. So.
What about just throwing this out there as a high pitch? What about private funding, donations, things like that? Is there any?
We did that with Nova. So we had a couple. We had Albertsons had given us a huge grant, $1 million grant for not Nova, TVLA to get started. We also had some additional money from like new schools from that as well. The unfortunate thing we saw was that it dried up and
It's not
Yeah, so
it's not
I
sustainable.
to answer that question, Trustee Kirkman, we probably have to talk with our legal a little bit. I do remember about 12 years ago, 11 years ago, when we were in the financial crisis, there was some community patrons that wanted to support the district from a private standpoint, and it ran into some roadblocks legally that they couldn't do some things, and it had to do with some land sales, and they were really trying to help the district. And actually, if it would have went through, would have helped a great deal, if I remember hearing it right. But unfortunately, the state wouldn't allow it, or there was a law that wouldn't allow it to occur. So I think there's some limitations to that.
And also along that line, with the land holdings that the district does have, and I'm looking specifically at the one over there by the airport.
Yes, there is assets like that, and that would be another option.
So the risk we run right now, which is a lower risk because we will be out of debt here soon, is anything bought with bond funds cannot be used for operations. So if we were to sell that now, we wouldn't be able to use that for operations.
The money?
Today. Yeah, so we would have to wait until we're out of debt. And then I don't believe there's any other stipulations past that with the bond funds, but once we're out of bond funds, then it's.
Which could be a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, we anticipate being out of bond debt in 2 years.
But
Really?
the idea of trying to use any asset we could to sell to generate revenue would be the mitigating strategy.
Yeah.
You know?
So really quick, just because I want to make sure, Trustee Simpson, are there any questions there for you guys?
No questions.
Is there a comment? We're down to about 15 minutes and we are at a 4 to 6. So at 6, our meeting does conclude.
The only other thing that I think might be not, again, using your
Disclaimer.
is not to say to go that direction, but would it maybe be of interest to start looking at a 4-day work week?
I think that's another option
Yeah.
that certainly.
I'm just
I think we
thinking,
had thrown that out there
again,
too.
disclaimer, like, doesn't mean we're walking down that walk, but
No, it's operating costs that could.
Yeah.
it's,
Good cut,
right,
sure.
yeah.
I can hear all the kids right now just going.
Yes. Trustee Valle, or Trustee Simpson, is that everything?
That's-
Trustee
yeah.
Valle?
Yeah, no, I think that would be very motivating for the citizens to pass a levy, because a lot of people probably don't want their schedules to be all messed up. No, I just want to thank you guys for being proactive. This is what it's all
Absolutely.
about, being proactive. and-
Absolutely.
And making sure we understand what storms are coming and getting prepared for it. So, good job. And to me, we may go through this or we may not. So this is good. But I'm looking forward to the plans to be prepared, so that we can be updated as to just whatever we anticipate. We got to start having the plans now because we already know what may be coming. So we're not going to get hit by surprises. So good job.
Well, contingency.
So trustees, the one question I will ask, just so that our administration has a clear understanding, are we wanting to see updates about this now that we're aware of these cliffs and we've asked some good questions? Are we wanting this to come back to us here in a few months? What are you guys wanting from the administration so that Dr. Russell and I can really work to make sure that you guys see that on an upcoming meeting?
Well, I would
More
ask-
updates,
I
just
would
that
ask-
update?
I would ask him, how often do you think you need to give us?
Perfect.
updates?
And
Yep.
so right now, we won't have anything
Yeah.
new,
Yep.
at least until
Gonna be
next
for a while.
fiscal year, I
Right.
guarantee that. So we'll
And
go
so do
through
you
the
want to let
budget
them know the
stuff.
hearings that are coming up?
Yeah,
There's
so
a
the
few
hearings
things.
and that kind of stuff
Let's
is
let
what
them
we'll
know.
have. There's nothing new that's gonna pop. If there is, then I'll definitely tell you in a regular board meeting. I don't think anything can get worse. I mean, knock on wood on that. Everything's pretty well established in that world. And so it really is, where we'll have more conversations, I think, is in August, September next year.
Yeah.
When we start seeing how many butts are in the seats.
Great.
And how many people are actually in, what we'll see on that.
You
because
mean
that'll kinda
August and
show-
September of this
Next-
year
of
for
this year.
next,
Yeah,
for
so
next school year?
To see where our revenue
Yeah, for
factors
fiscal year.
are.
Yep.
And that's really gonna show us where we're at, and then by then we'll hear some more about what the state's maybe doing on the other end.
Trustees, I thought maybe we'd review this sometime in the summer around July or so, and then again, as Mr. Dewey mentioned, in August, September, we would probably need to have a discussion about where we are in enrollment, what numbers are coming in,
I think it's
and then
August.
a levy.
End of August.
I think there has to be a
I think
determination
there's
by
like that, 'cause they
late
have that
September,
figure out.
typically if we want to run one in November. If we don't, and then you'd have, I think, till March if you want to run one in May.
So,
And then if you don't, then.
She's gonna look it up.
so Dr. Russell, what I hear you saying is you'd like to bring us back an update in July. Mr. Dewey feels pretty good, July, August, somewhere in there, so maybe even August. And
Sure.
then what I also hear you saying is that if this board chooses to go ahead and run a levy, when are you saying that, what was the date that you had said?
I'd have to check. It's typically late September to run in November.
I think it's actually even before then, I think
Or
it's beginning of
is it
September, so
beginning
maybe
of
do it in
September?
August board meeting,
Okay.
I think. But
So
I'm
early
not-
September.
August.
I don't know, so.
November.
Chrissy's gonna look it up.
Sure, so I just want all of our trustees to be on the
Yeah.
same page that we should expect to hear some conversations probably late summer regarding a levy, possibly
July,
running
for
the
sure.
levy. So July,
And then
Yep.
it'd be March if you did one in May,
Yeah.
I think.
That-
Early
I
March.
will add one more comment, the money, the property tax money that is, that the governor did at the very end that they overrode, that is bringing some money in that potentially will help our supplemental levy conversation as well. So I will know more in July on how much it's gonna be
perfect,
potentially.
so July
So
would
we'll
be a
have to
good
wait.
date.
Because we're so close to being paid off on our bonds, we'll be able to use that towards a supplemental levy if passed. It can go 100% towards a supplemental levy, anywhere between $4 and $5 million is what we're looking at.
Yeah, and I think
Wow.
that's actually one of those mitigating options that
It
might
really
be
is.
included
It is.
in
Yeah.
because.
And it,
yeah.
so it helps, we could even ask for more and it would still be less
You're
than what
retiring
people
Can
are
we
doing.
ask to make sure that we see that regarding a
Yeah,
levy
I'll let you know
conversation,
for
just
sure.
making sure that
Because
that's
it
brought
goes
up?
there. I've been working with these guys, we're still
Yep.
trying to figure out how much it is, we've seen some preliminary, the state's promised us they'll get us that money before our L2, but,
I love how you operate on promises like that.
well, no, it's actually, they put this in writing.
Yeah, I got it.
Because they have to let us know, because when we do our L2, I have to put that on there to lower the amount I ask for the bond fund.
Yeah.
So it's a requirement.
It's required,
to-
yeah.
So that's how the law reads, so they have to get it to us early. I don't know if I'll have the exact number this year. The problem is it's based on a whole bunch of factors, but they anticipate it going up next year as opposed to going down from this year, and they've told me 4.5 this year.
And I think through the superintendent's regular updates in our board meetings of just
Does that feel
staff,
good too?
well, just of staffing. I mean, you can look at how staffing is going, where we are at hiring, and that's a really good indication of kind of where we're headed to, so.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
Some of those.
And
Well, I just want to make sure that we know because, we do have the budget hearing and we want to make sure that we're bringing enough work sessions to the board. But I really appreciate the time and effort that goes into having to have these, and that's why we're making sure. So as long as you guys feel good, are you suggesting another type of budget update, or are you just saying this is
No.
how you can also
I
look at
think
it?
through regular,
Through
the
regular
superintendent's
updates, yep.
regular updates is.
Yep, perfect.
they'll
And of course,
put in there what we need to know.
at any given time, remember, trustees, you can meet with Mr. Dewey. Our administration is always available if there's more questions.
I'm not meeting with Randy after.
Yeah, no, we're.
Okay, so
if
my
anything
comments-
changes, I definitely will
Yeah.
tell you each month.
And I'm gonna say the same thing. I love, even back when we were having, bond conversations, I love how fiscally responsible you guys are. I love the conversations. I love that you guys are constantly focused on it. I love that you guys are making us aware of cliffs. I love that you guys are aware of cliffs. To me, just your very attention to the budget seems to me like it's a very healthy relationship that our district has with that budget.
Yeah, we don't want it ever happen.
No, no.
It's not going to.
Thank you. Are we adjourned?
All right, thanks guys, appreciate it.